Okay. Right. Good morning, everybody. We're just going to wait as people join. Sorry, and I'm just watching all the group chat. As you join, we are going to try and help with, and it's in the chat as well, we are going to try and ask that everybody turn off their videos unless you're speaking. So it helps keep the call a little less data heavy, and with all the load shedding, it might also help people. While you're waiting, and we'll talk a little bit about it going on, but I've put it in the for those of you that want to do some multitasking before we start in the next 3 minutes or so. You're welcome to fill out the Menti, little Menti survey that we're doing around the theme of today's topic, to share your thoughts about what participatory democracy means to you. And we'll give it another 2 minutes or so, and then we will kick off. I still haven't gotten sophisticated enough to play music while we wait on, I don't know what it's like for those of you that are in the other parts of the country, but it's rainy and cold and blustery here in Cape Town. So spring has yet to sprung. Another reminder that we are recording this session, so if you don't feel comfortable, I'm afraid this just helps us share to people who can't join in the morning sessions. Yeah, please feel free to say what you need to in an email if you don't feel comfortable on the recording, or if you want to have a phone call with any of the C.A.N co-learning teams like myself, and we will definitely make the recording available. We've got a checklist, so now we're learning how to do all of this so much better. But of course, I apologize in advance if we have any technical difficulties as we work our way through. Right, it's 8:05. I think if everybody's comfortable to get started. My name is Thokozile Madonko, and I'm part of the C.A.N co-learning team, which is a fantastic group of wonderful souls trying to think through how to learn from what we're going through, never let a good crisis go to waste, but also to have an opportunity to take time for all of us who are in the trenches, sorry to use a military term, and to be able to share our thoughts and ideas. And so coming out of one of the last sessions, the theme that came up was around what does C.A.N democracy mean in the age of COVID? And reflecting really on how to build back better, and what does that really look like, and what does it mean going forward, and how do we how do we share our thoughts on what it means to practice democracy within our local communities, and then more broadly as C.A.Ns have been able to share across communities, across neighborhoods, which has been so powerful. And importantly, how do we make sense of political power and party political power? So that's also a little bit of a touch stone there that we can think through as we do our work. So we've got three wonderful speakers that are joining us today. We've got Luanda Makolwane from the Eastern Cape Together C.A.N. We've got Keith Peacock from Observatory, and Mzikona, sorry, I can't see, Mgledle from the Langa C.A.N. And then MZ is having network issues, so hopefully he'll be able to join us. And then we have as a respondent, Shirley Walters, who's a professor of adult and continuing education at the University of the Western Cape. But more importantly, she's been participating in her own neighborhood C.A.N. And so we have the real advantage of her long history in thinking about adult education, thinking about participatory democracy, and not only in South Africa, but she has an international reach and can provide some reflections on that. And so we're really excited to have her kind of feed in a little bit on the three speakers. So I'm going to try and not talk for too long, and I have a colleague who's going to keep me in check. But before we kick off the three speakers, what I thought would be lovely is if we could just take 1 minute to wherever you are, wherever you're sitting, to take a big deep breath on this winter. Well, in Cape Town at least, it's a really wintry day. Take a deep breath, please stretch. Let's get your kind of blood flowing as much as you can, and work out those shoulders, lift up and release. I really hope you're doing it, I can't see you. Breathe in and do a out, loud, out. Give your brain a lovely little massage. And the back of your head, massage. A little stretch, because if you're sitting as well, we tend to forget about nice stretch. And then one more deep breath in. And out. Right. Perfect. I hope you're all ready to go. Let's see some thumbs up or claps or whatever so we can see that. Yay. Thanks, Jessica. Right. So in no order, in particular order, I think let's head out to the Eastern Cape. And Luanda, would you like to just talk through your experiences of what C.A.N democracy means to you in the age of COVID, reflecting on your experiences to date? I hand over to you. And if you can put on your video, that would be great, as it's nice to see the speakers.
What is happening? Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. So within our context of C.A.N democracy, earlier on, when we first started initially, we recognized as a collective that there was a mass information gap in South Africa, within the Eastern Cape, particularly because of our context and where within the province. The province is still largely, in our opinion, a rural province. And the information that we were receiving from government at the time was information that was not speaking to the rural community So we decided to fill that gap through us translating the information into isiXhosa, which was something at the time that was missing. And number two, using language that would have relevance within the communities that we were aiming to reach. One of the main, I'd say our objectives at the time when we initially started was to explain the concept of flattening the curve. We found that the discourse that was used by government at the time was very much technical. And within the rural context, it really missed the people. Like it had no positionality. And what we found helped with us a lot. Our C.A.N, Iqonga Lothungelo, was born within an institution of higher learning that had prior community networks that we were working with within our research projects. So when we formed Iqonga Lothungelo, we really consolidated throughout the province those community networks that we were working with within the various research projects. That then throughout time started to grow. As of currently, we have C.A.N champions in all the municipal districts in the province. Yes, in the province. And what I find has helped us a lot has been this implicit social contract that exists within our network that is premised on an ethic of care, respect that has been built over time, but that continues to have an outward mass reach. How can we track that? We have been able to track that through the continuous growing number in our C.A.N network that has, and I think the difference between our C.A.N networks and the others, until now we have operated within a digital platform because of the geographic setting of our champions. And I think that's important because we continue to have mass engagement, mass outreach, but we have yet to have an interface meeting with all of our C.A.N champions within the different districts and regions. But also, it's been also premised on a principle of co-generation of knowledge and production of that knowledge. What is happening? So our C.A.N champions are able to tell us what is happening within their contexts, and then we are able to co-create or produce knowledge to say through our Facebook, through our website, through the various videos that we have uploaded onto the Facebook and YouTube, to say this is what's happening on the ground. And then we are able to also take information coming from government, translate it into isiXhosa through written word, through video, and then mass distribute that information from us to the C.A.N network. But it wouldn't be possible, all of this wouldn't be possible if we have not all been able to work together. And I think over the 4 or 5 months, there has been an active engagement between us and the various working groups that we have in the C.A.N network with the C.A.N champions for us to work together for a common good. And I think that has held and works within the democratization of knowledge and the building of a society where everybody is able to take an active role in capacity building of themselves, but that of the community as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions, and it's exciting to kind of think through and I'm just going to throw out some words that I captured as I was listening for those of us that are all on the call to reflect on this idea of co-generation of knowledge, or co-creation, as you use the term interchangeably, and how does that happen? So that was one of the questions. You mentioned that most of the engagement to date and working together has been mainly in the sort of digital terrain, and so how does that shift and change the way we're able to work together? And then I love this idea of the movement of information. So whether it's from government to communities, or communities to government, or between communities, and the translation of that information. And really, what I loved was the summary around working together. So MZ has managed to join the call, and so MZ, if you're comfortable, I'm going to ask Keith to speak next, and then you can be our third speaker. So you can just settle a little bit. So as I change over to Keith, please write down or type in your thoughts and reflections on Rwanda's input, and let's connect them to Keith's input. So now we're in the Western Cape.
Well, good morning on this not very early spring day. I will be as brief as possible, as this is a participatory workshop, and I'm sure no one wishes to be a passive participant. Just one correction, this is observatory in Johannesburg, not in the Western Cape. We have one here as well. There's little doubt that the C.A.N initiative has been an excellent response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The response by communities has been stunning. It has shown the strength of inter-community solidarity, especially in the area of food security. The C.A.Ns have confronted xenophobia and Afrophobia, as many of the recipients of support, and to a lesser degree those involved, have been undocumented households and communities who are not eligible for support from government. The C.A.N has also been part of the exposure of the weaknesses of the three spheres of government in their own response to the national crisis, indicative of the separation of government from our people. The strengths of the mobilization of civil society to meet the needs of the most vulnerable within our communities can, however, be seen as a weakness in terms of the sustainability of that mobilization in the longer term. It is critical that we avoid reversion to the paternalistic view held by many in state institutions who believe they, and not communities, have the answers to the many challenges that communities face. With some notable exceptions, the mobilization of resources has been the provision of food and associated materials to the households we have supported. Whilst this type of work will continue, there is a need to ensure active, organized, participatory democracy within communities, rather than passive recipients of aid. Our legislation is littered with references to participatory democracy. One of the opportunities of the development of C.A.Ns is to be part of the transformation of this commitment into reality. We do not have time to cover all of the possibilities for the development of an active citizenry. I will touch on only two possibilities. One of the areas that many C.A.Ns are discussing is the development of working towards local food security through food growing initiatives. There is little doubt that's something that is a logical development of our existing work. However, we need to ask if this is sufficient. A potential opportunity is issue-based activism. One example is further developing our commitment to food security by targeting retailers to minimize food wastage, by ensuring the distribution of food that would normally be destroyed to those most in need. Some C.A.Ns have already engaged with shops to ensure that this happens, but it needs to become a national norm. Linked to this is excellent international legislation on minimising food wastage. That would require a national campaign to bring our own legislation in line, or hopefully exceed best practice. Secondly, there are opportunities to rejuvenate the role of communities in developing their own initiatives and the priorities of specifically local government in terms of their needs. This is an annual process, which is the development and amendment to what is known as the Integrated Development Plans, IDPs, of local government. The start to review and become conversant with previous IDPs and beginning to be part of the development of the new 5-year IDP for the next financial year is now. Historically, the process has become increasingly top-down, dictated by the time frame set by councils and forms of decision-making that is erroneously referred to as consultation. Classically, it may involve a councillor holding a poorly attended meeting or two. For successful, relevant community involvement, it is necessary to preempt the present approach of local government, whilst mindful of the deadlines set by councils. Greater participation and awareness of the outcomes also assists communities to begin holding local government to account for service delivery. It is important to be aware that it is not only about engagement with local government around the IDP. It is not simply a method of making demands on the resources of local government, on the resources held by local government. It allows communities to work towards wider sustainable organisation and empowerment, using this to initiate other relevant local, regional and national activities that have the potential to build real participatory democracy. It does, however, mean there is a lot of preparatory work that needs to be done within wards and associated townships. While many C.A.Ns have already grasped the formal organisations in their own community, the informal networks also need to be identified, and it is critical to ensure the widest possible dialogue within communities to legitimise the ongoing process. The participants on this discussion will have their own approaches, but one of the key critical ways to success is creating ongoing channels to facilitate dialogue and information sharing, which will vary from community to community. I hope I've been of some assistance in stimulating debate. I'll end this short input now, and hopefully your own critical input into this discussion will assist in the future development of our C.A.Ns. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Perfect timing. My alarm was just about to go off, so really great. You know, I wanted to jump under the table. So Joburg. So we've gone Eastern Cape, Johannesburg, well, Gauteng, and then we'll be coming to Cape Town. So just a few things that that I captured was around looking at experience on the ground and identifying how the experience on the ground can inform broader local and national issues and policy issues and directions, but also the need to, within our C.A.N networks, to think about other networks. You used the term informal networks, to enable wide dialogue and legitimacy. And I thought this was really a wonderful kind of way of adding to the work happening in the Eastern Cape for us to think about these themes. And so, Mzi, if you are ready, Mzikona, I'd like to hand over to you, and we can hear what's happening in the Western Cape. Sorry, everybody, I feel so bad. I really do.
Hello, everyone. This is Mzikona Mgele from the Volunteer for Cape Town Together, a member for Langa C.A.N. So I will just firstly explain early days of how the solidarity or building back better means when it comes to the C.A.Ns around the Western Cape. So all of us, we didn't really have a directive way of responding to the pandemic. We had to make as we go, we had to form structures that works for the communities where we belong. All of us had dreams of what COVID-19 would look like, even if were they negative or positive. People did have assumption of what will happen. People didn't really want to wait for the government. People wanted to be active on their communities for change. Personally, I dreamed of a place where you will find public workers on the streets, police raising awareness about COVID, community activists joining and also making sure that everyone is aware about the messaging of COVID-19. Everyone is staying safe up until we are all safe. So what does this mean to us, the democracy of self-organizing for the C.A.Ns up until this time? Basically, we organized in different ways, but the common goal is the same. Our C.A.Ns around the Western Cape has shown the interest of finding solutions on the second pandemic, which is hunger, more established community safe kitchens for COVID, where they respond in a collective way, where we share our experiment and learning. So our C.A.N in Langa is basically people who are coming from registered entities or formalized structures. The freedom of the C.A.N is that we are all organizing at a community level. We are all not being boxed to a certain initiative to focus on a certain mission. Our loose way of organizing, it's making us all to be on the same page about self-organizing for communities. So I've seen an increase whereby C.A.Ns around the Western Cape are being sort of like a middleman between the government and the people at a community level. The response of way that we do our campaigns, that we do our programs of feeding our messaging about COVID, it has played a huge interest because so many government departments have reached out to C.A.N as individuals to work with them in such a way that they want to know what's happening on the ground. What is it that is on the ground? Because there's been a huge gap before we got to this time of life in the pandemic, where the community was kind of disconnected, communities were kind of segregated. So the C.A.N has shining the light of inequality and also try to show the way that communities can organize and also unite in a way that works for them. So I will also mention some of the cool or future investment or campaigns that are kind of leading people or maybe showing people how they can organize in a way that is working for their communities. So the kitchen in the Western Cape, most of them, they have formed a way of distributing food to local residents where existing structures they don't really reach, by using bicycles. The innovative of using what was missing as a collective movement for all of us. So the freedom of the C.A.N, basically, it's all about self-organizing and making sure that people are happy about the way they organize for their community, and also people are organizing for people so that everyone can be safe until we are all safe. So I will also mention what does Build Back Better means for most of the C.A.Ns in the Western Cape. So we have seen a common response when it comes to Facebook, our messaging of collaborative planning, sharing of information, what's needed to be known about COVID and how we can all be safe. We have seen an increase of government support in such a way that it's going straight to the people, not bringing a middleman to facilitate some of the initiatives for the communities. So we have seen a lot of corporates coming straight to connect to the people on the ground, a lot of people organizing and saying that this is working for us here, this is how we can make sure that everyone is included. So organizing for solidarity. So a number of C.A.Ns are basically exploring the freedom of not being registered, not being boxed to be identified. Oh, this is the C.A.N which is focusing only on this. And then if you want to belong, you can go somewhere else, because this is our objectives and our mandate of the registration or the registered structure. So the freedom of opening communities to collaborate, the freedom of making sure that if now I go to places like Durbanville around the Western Cape, I know that there is a C.A.N admin. If now I go to Khayelitsha, I know that there are C.A.Ns out there to connect and learn, and we share experiences of the challenges we're facing in our communities and how we can unite and build back better. I would like to stop there. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Fantastic, thank you. If everybody can just do a little clap sign, quickly unmute to say thank you to all the speakers, the 3 speakers, and warm up your fingers, do a quick clap. Thank you, everybody. And from MZ's things that I captured was, what I loved was the collaborative planning. This idea of direct delivery I thought was really interesting, and the freedom to collaborate. I thought that was a very powerful thing. So sorry, that was your timer. And without any wasting time, because I know people have to leave at 9 a.m. sharp, Shirley, are you ready to respond? I can't wait to hear. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. Great to be here, and thanks very much for the invitation. It's obviously quite difficult to respond immediately to everything people have said on the hoof, so to speak. But what I wanted to do is just to say, and I think I'll switch off my video so to save. What I'd like to do is to just comment on the question of the meaning of democracy, and then to look at some of the tensions that people haven't necessarily spoken to, but are always part of attempting to work in a participatory democratic way, and maybe just to try and get under the skin of what participatory democracy might in fact mean. And please just give me a warning if I go on too long. It's important for all of us, I think, to recognize that the definition of democracy and participatory democracy is not necessarily clear. it gets continually negotiated and contested. And it is located within its own historical context. So there's no pure form of participatory democracy or of democracy. And I think this is a very important point, because it's often we think, you know, are we doing it right? What are the exact things we should be doing? And I think what I've been hearing coming through in the three presentations is that each of the C.A.Ns is trying to make it work for themselves in a differentiated way. And I think that is very, very important. So it's not as if we can judge one another by, oh, but you're not doing this, you should be doing that. I think it's very important to recognize that these take their own form and shape. A democracy has been argued about for the last couple of thousand years. So it's not as if it's something that we will know exactly what it means, as I've said. And the dominant form, certainly in the West, of democracy is representative democracy, and often it's linked to capitalist forms of organizing the economy. So that's what we have experienced largely, and many of us have not really experienced participatory democracy in any kind of full form. If we think about participatory democracy, one of the key aspects of it, or one of the underpinning assumptions about participatory democracy, is that it has educational value, that we learn about democracy by doing democracy. And I think that's an extremely important aspect. And as I'm listening to each of the speakers, I think that awareness is there. And I think in Cape Town Together generally, that the idea of co-learning, what we're actually doing right now is part of the process of understanding how participatory democracy works and why it's important. But I think it's also, we have to be very aware of why we're doing it. And it's not necessarily the most, all situations don't necessarily mean we need to use the same approach. So there might be times when in fact a representative democracy is really important. And there are times when participatory democracy is important. And often a combination of the two is what is needed in different circumstances. So I think we must not necessarily beat ourselves up for not somehow having this pure form, because there is no such thing. In terms of some of the tensions or contradictions within participatory democracy, which you might be experiencing at some point, and this has come very much from my own engagement and in the 1980s in the democratic movement, and studying the ways that we grappled with democracy, and we were kind of almost fanatical about, and it became known as being democracy. We were really struggling to understand what this democracy meant. But some of the reasons we were struggling around it, I mean, there were many, but one of them was that many organizations were very committed to leadership development, whether it was through the Black consciousness movement and the recognition that Black people needed to have opportunities to develop a leadership capability, so the self-organizing cooperatives, so it was very much driven by an idea that we need to organize in ways that leadership is developed. The same within the feminist movements and the women's movements. The idea was that women needed opportunities to develop leadership. The importance of both the process, the means and the ends was stressed. So the ways we organize are almost as important as the ends towards which we're organizing. And part of that was the sense of the building of these leadership capabilities. And just to say something about leadership, the idea that a horizontal organization does not require leadership, I think, is false. We might not require one leader, but we do, and we demonstrate leadership in all the C.A.Ns, at the center, through co-learning. We are demonstrating leadership. And I think sometimes organizations in many parts of the world have kind of lost, they've kind of thought, well, we're a horizontal organization, we don't need leaders, and we don't need leadership. And I think that needs to be corrected. And we need to recognize that we need leadership if we're going to go anywhere, but we don't necessarily need the strong leader. Some of the tensions that are inevitable in many of the organizations is around the tension between the individual and the collective. In the 1980s, many of the organizations erred on the side of the collective. And it was, you didn't mention people's names, everything was almost anonymous. The collective was key. And I think there was quite a lot of fight back. I think what's happening now is the individual is being more emphasized. And if I think about some of the value propositions within Cape Town Together, there's an acknowledgement that individuals need to have the space to be spontaneous and to take leadership. But there will always be this tension between the individual and the collective, and it will play out in different ways at different times. The other one is around action and reflection. There are many activists who want to be in the action all the time, and there'll be others who want to actually be more reflective on the action. And I think that the tension between the action, and the action might be the service delivery, or it might be political action, but that is an area where you might find differences in your organization. And this links to also the question of theory and practice. And this was also very strong in the organizations in the 80s and into the 90s, was that we felt it was really important to theorize what it was we were doing, because you can't necessarily understand the political action which transformation needs unless you theorize, unless you understand how social change in fact occurs. So again, the balance between theory and practice, and giving space and time to learn from history and to learn from theories that have been developed over hundreds of years. The democratic participatory practices, which you've been talking about today as well, entail the collective participation in decision-making, in planning and evaluation, in sharing of information and skills, that came through very strongly, in joint responsibility for those taking of the decisions, for coherent theoretical knowledge, if the organization is to maintain some sort of advocacy role. Some other major contradictions come through in our relationships between internal and external accountability. To whom are we accounting, or to what values are we accountable? And I think it's a really interesting question to ask ourselves, is where does the authority lie in our organizing? Is it with the social contract? Is it with the broader membership? Is it with the leadership? Is it to a political party? Is it to whom is it? And I think that there's often contestation over that. the question of recognizing that conflict is inevitable. Whenever you have humans together, we will have different and diverse ways of thinking about things. And in terms of our social class, sex, gender, racial categorizations, ethnicity, age, all of these things will mean that we might see the world in a different way. And so the question I would ask is, how are you acknowledging conflict, the inevitability of conflict or dissent within your organizing? And what mechanisms are you building to ensure that it's a normal way, it's a normal part of organizing rather than some aberration?
Perfect, Shirley.
Yep.
Do you want to wrap up? Sorry, just checking time.
No, I think that it's that recognition that power struggles, contestations, negotiations are inevitable, and how we build in ways of working with them are key. And what I would say from my observation of the 10 ways of working that Cape Town Together have put together, I would say that my reading of that is that it's a kind of a radical humanism that underpins those values. Yeah, so those are just some thoughts which I hope are helpful.
Thank you. Can everybody give a clap to Shirley? That was really useful. Warm up our bodies. And now we have 15 minutes. Thank you so much, Shirley, and thank you to the speakers for questions. So please put your questions into the group chat or write them down if you're not ready to fire away. I've got the participant box open in front of me, so if you want to put your hand up and speak online, that's also fine. So yeah, just a quick minute. Questions are coming through, so those of you that I think, whoa, there's essays coming through, so that's great. Perfect. I'm just going to give it a minute for people to think through their questions. Perfect. Okay, so if I could ask the three, well, 4 speakers, I'm going to throw a question to you. I'm going to throw some questions to you that seem to be relevant to you in terms of working within the C.A.N. And the one was, could you speak a little bit about how you've dealt with conflict within your C.A.Ns to date? And okay, that's okay, yeah, so building in space. And then Shirley, if you could speak to what you mean by radical humanism. Okay, perfect. Oh, and then this is an interesting question. Has the pandemic shocked many of us out of apathy and into more engaged citizen action? I think that's very interesting. So how do we harness this moment? Okay, I will, and then I'm going to quickly open up to Eleanor, and then we will take those round of questions, and then we'll do another round. So Eleanor, you can ask your question. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Hope so.
Yes, and thanks so much, Toko, and thanks to the speakers. I was just wondering if any of the speakers felt like sharing experiences of engaging with elected officials or bureaucrats or sort of state representatives of any sort, and how they found it, and sort of, yeah, the receptiveness that they found. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Eleanor. And also, please remember that those of you that are on the Zoom call can also share your experiences in the chat, or even if you feel you have a burning feeling to answer some of the questions, you're also welcome to put your hand up. So over to Shirley, and I want to say Lulu, Luande, Mzi, and Keith. Who would like to go first? Just bounce it open.
Yeah, I can go first.
Perfect.
Of the conflict. Just to share that there are challenges within self-organizing and also organizing, not being boxed or identified as an NPO, as an NGO or a company, without any brand out there that we are hoping to achieve. So basically, there have been a lot of challenges early days about politics, trying to hijack the movement, and also some of the people who are kind of trying to shield the work of the C.A.N on their projects, so that we are seen as a sub initiative or campaign for their projects. So we have faced all of those challenges. Basically, there was no right or wrong answer in dealing with it. But what we have did is to make sure that we are making sure that we work with key stakeholders as this way of organizing, engaging with what's happening, what are the discussions about COVID, what is the government plan, trying to help out the community. So we had to engage in those conversations and say, we are here and this is what we are doing and how we can work together. Not to say, this is what we are doing and we are collaborating within ourselves, and also explaining the good work that we do, and also try to stay away from politics, because they are draining and they are hijacking the good work done by the people. We didn't want to let organizations speak on behalf of us. We wanted to speak by ourselves and what we do, and also trying to make sure that we build local relationship with the registered entities, NPOs and NGOs, so that they can know that we are also in the same space and our common goals and what we're trying to change, the same community. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Keith, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. I just want to talk briefly about our experiences in our engagement with two spheres of government, which is local and provincial. We did try and engage in the earlier days of the pandemic, but what we found was, and it's very similar to the previous speaker, that they didn't quite understand the role of local communities in responding to the pandemic. So apart from one or two specific issues that needed the support of social development, for example, we basically ignored the regulations that were coming. I mean, unfortunately, in the early days, there was a typical bureaucratic response by both of those spheres of government, and we just ignored those regulations. Many of you will remember that there was requirements that you had to report when you were distributing food, which wards you were going through, and all of those types of things. So we just ignored it. It was unfortunate because we would have preferred to have a cooperative partnership with those spheres of government, but it just didn't happen. And sometimes you have to make decisions that isolate because they're negatively impacting on your effectiveness. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Shirley, Luandile?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. What I understand by radical humanism is, in fact, the recognition that the individual is important, but also that the collective is important. So that in the sort of value statements that have been made around 10 ways of working, there's a lot of emphasis on solidarity, on collaboration, but there's also emphasis on encouraging initiative, sustaining energy, move at the speed of trust, be inclusive. So there's kind of a balance between the recognition that in order to get things done, sometimes the individual must in a way be given the freedom to move forward, or a small group or whatever. You aren't held by the collective. You don't have to get a mandate in order to do something. So there's a recognition of the individual and the importance of giving the individual freedom, but at the same time there are collective values which emphasize the collective and emphasize solidarity as opposed to charity.
Yeah. And then I'm going to take liberties as the facilitator while people, if there's anybody in the last 3 minutes or so that want to speak. I've just been looking at the chat box, and I think what is so important that's coming through, and it links to the radical humanism or the principles, if you don't want to use radical humanism, but the principles of the C.A.N's, value statement of the C.A.N's, is focusing in on power. And Andrea has kind of put out not a question but a consideration around democracy being a power system. And then we have sorry, I'm just feeding through. A point was raised about how do we deal with class or wealth, basically, from more resource neighborhoods to not so resource neighborhoods. If we take it from a humanist perspective and see power in the ways that it is exercised and how it can be exercised, but we recognize that everybody is human in the sense that they have inalienable rights. So we go into, some people like it or not, a rights framework, that we all have the right to food, the right to housing, the right to, and within housing, it's the right to access to land in some ways, the right to education. So certain things that we agree across the board, the right to choose, choice. How does that then impact our interactions as we try to solve the crises that we're faced with, which then requires a much harder, closer reading of what it is that we are facing within our communities, but also across communities, which we've seen. We had an interesting interaction around what kind of food provisioning. Right? Do we give sandwiches or do we give cash transfers? And each of those decisions has a major impact on building that trust, building, co-creating, understanding each other individually. So Andrea, I see your hand is up.
I think it's a very interesting session. Thank you, everybody. I think it's quite interesting, maybe if we start to thinking that the participation is a right in itself. So, and also is a individual right, because the individual have a right to participate and make activity, but also a collective right, because community have. So the balance between these is important. But to me, it's very important to start to consider the participation as a right, not a tools.
Thanks, Andrea. And the way that has manifested was in response to the crisis, or to COVID-19. We saw that the participation component of all our legislation was put on hold. So that's something to think about. It was a police/military response, which by its nature is not participatory. So that's very interesting for us to think through. Are there any last questions before we close? My clock is saying 9 o'clock. So let's put on our videos if we can. And say, I don't know, let's think of a nice spring term word. I want to say power to the people. That's what I'm feeling this morning. So power to the people.
Power
and the
to the
cans.
people. Power to the people.
Let's hear it. Yay. Thank you so much. There will be a recording, and don't stop the conversation. Write down your thoughts. Take this to your C.A.N conversations, and we look forward to the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
I suppose I should say Amandla.
Go ahead too.